When my own son denied my request to join our family's group chat, I stared at the screen thinking it was a mistake. But it wasn't. I had just been locked out of my own bloodline by the child I once held in my arms. By the end of that week, I had rewritten my will, gathered every memory I still had of him, and mailed it all away with a goodbye letter he didn't expect. What came back wasn't forgiveness. It was something more powerful and more heartbreaking. You see, I'm not a monster. I paid every check. I never disappeared completely. But I wasn't there either. Divorce taught me that money could be love. I was wrong. Now my grown son treats me like a ghost. And worse, my grandson doesn't even know my name. This is the story of how I lost my family one message at a time, and how I tried not to be welcomed again, but to matter just once before the end. Before we dive into this journey of silence, regret, and one final unexpected dinner invitation, make sure you're ready. Because what happens when a forgotten father fights to matter again will challenge everything you think you know about forgiveness and family. My name is Robert Alden, and at 65, I've learned that silence can weigh more than bricks and steel combined. I spent over 3 decades designing highways, bridges, and tunnel structures that connected cities, families' lives. Yet somehow, I failed to build a bridge to the one life I helped create. I wasn't always alone. There was a time when I came home to a warm kitchen and the chaos of Lego bricks scattered across the floor. My wife Joanna used to joke that I was more in love with blueprints than birthdays. Maybe she was right. When we divorced, our son David was only 7. I told myself he was too young to remember the shouting, the slammed doors, the cold silences that filled our final months. But children remember everything. They just don't always know how to explain the pain. After the split, Joanna got custody. I got weekends, and eventually, I got nothing. At first, I made the drive every Saturday 2 hours each way, clutching a Happy Meal in one hand and guilt in the other. I tried to make up for lost time with toys trips to the zoo, an extra scoop of ice cream. But missed birthdays became missed weeks, and missed weeks turned into polite phone calls and stiff Christmas cards. I paid child support on time every month for 18 years. I even set up a college fund. But I never made it to a single parent-teacher conference. I never stood in the audience during a school play. I didn't know the name of his first best friend. Still, I told myself I was doing enough. I was providing. That's what fathers do, right? We fix the house, pay the bills, keep the lights on. But there's no check you can write that replaces a hug, and no amount of wiring in the walls makes up for not showing up when it matters. Now, 2 decades later, I sit in a quiet house, the smell of dust and old coffee clinging to every surface. My wife passed away. 5 years ago, she remarried, lived a full life. I didn't go to the funeral. I didn't feel I had the right. David didn't invite me. I scroll through Facebook more than I care to admit. I found my son's profile a year ago. He doesn't post much, but there's a picture of him with a woman, his wife, I assume, and a boy with the same eyes he used to have. My grandson. The realization hit like a freight train. I was a grandfather, and no one had told me. There were photos of birthday cakes, school projects, trips to the lake. Memories I hadn't even been offered a glimpse of. That's when it started the ache. Not just the kind in your joints, but the kind in your chest, the one that keeps you up at 3 a.m. I wanted in. Not out of guilt, but out of longing. I wanted to know the boy who shared my blood. I wanted to laugh at his knock-knock jokes, hear about his favorite dinosaur, maybe even pass down my old fishing rod. So I did something I hadn't done in years. I clicked request to join on the messenger group titled Alden Family Chat. My hand trembled. It was just a button, but it felt like a confession. A silent apology. An olive branch wrapped in digital form. I waited and waited. 3 days passed. Then came the response. Request denied. No explanation. No follow-up. Just a closed door. I stared at the screen for a long time. Maybe it was a mistake. Maybe David hadn't seen it. Or maybe I had already been erased. That rejection, small, quiet, and cold, hit harder than the divorce papers ever did. I had hoped foolishly, perhaps, that time had softened the past. That being an old man now with a slower walk and a quieter voice might earn me another chance. I was wrong. There was a time I believed money could fix anything. A few extra $100 here, a check sent early there. I thought if I kept the payments steady, the roof over his head solid, and the tuition covered, I'd fulfilled my role. I wasn't abusive. I wasn't absent by choice. I was working, building, surviving. Isn't that what men do? After the divorce, the house went quiet. No more cereal bowls on the counter. No more stray socks under the couch. I filled that silence with overtime and conference calls. I convinced myself I was doing the right thing. If I couldn't be there for every scraped knee and bad grade, at least I could pay for the best Band-Aids and tutors. I remember once when David was 9, he called me on my birthday. Joanna must have made him. He asked, "Dad, can I come to your house this weekend?" I looked at the blueprint spread across my desk, the deadline looming. I told him no, I had to work. Next weekend, okay. I heard the pause, the kind that echoes louder than any words. He said, "Okay," and hung up. I didn't realize then that those next weekends were adding up. That each maybe later was another chisel strike against a bond already cracking. I missed his 10th birthday, stuck at an airport in Denver. I missed his 13th, sick with the flu. I missed his high school graduation, couldn't get out of a meeting I thought was too important to reschedule. At the time, I told myself he understood. That he'd appreciate it when he was older. That he'd look back and see a father who gave everything he could. I didn't understand that what he really needed wasn't money, it was presence. Years passed. Calls turned into texts. Then even the texts stopped. I sent him a watch for his college graduation. No thank you. No acknowledgement. Just silence. I assumed he was busy growing, becoming his own man. I never imagined he was building a life with me deliberately left out. I found his wife's Instagram 2 years ago. Her name is Melissa. She's bright, always smiling, posting about parenting tips and birthday decorations. She posted a photo of David and their son on a carousel. David had his hands on the boy's shoulders, guiding him, steadying him, smiling in a way I didn't know he could. It was like watching a stranger live the life I'd forgotten to ask for. That was the day I realized something was truly broken. It wasn't just that I'd missed out on his life. It was that he'd stopped inviting me to even witness it. I hadn't just missed the milestones. I'd missed the memories. The quiet ones. The bedtime stories. The sick days. The pancakes on Sunday mornings. I tried to imagine what David remembered. If he even knew I'd driven 3 hours one night to drop off his asthma inhaler when Joanna forgot to pack it. Or that I cried the night I saw him dancing with his mother at his middle school recital, watching from the back, too ashamed to come forward. But what he remembers, I suspect, is the space, the silence, the chair I never sat in, the applause I never gave, the hugs I never offered. And now, as I sit in this empty living room, watching my grandson grow through filtered photos, and grainy videos, I feel the weight of every absence. I've never held that child, never heard his voice, never smelled the sun in his hair, or felt his little hand grab my finger. He's growing up without me, just like his father did. I used to think fatherhood was about responsibility, about doing your duty quietly and without complaint. But maybe it's not. Maybe it's about the small moments, the scraped knees, the late night talks, the dumb jokes at breakfast. Maybe it's about being there when you're not asked to be, when it's inconvenient, when you're tired, broke, or behind on work. Maybe that's when it counts the most. And maybe the cost of missing those moments isn't measured in lost time, but in lost trust, lost connection, lost love. That realization didn't come in a flash. It crept in slowly each time I scrolled past another birthday cake or watched another video of my grandson learning to walk. It came finally the day I saw a photo of David with his arm around his son captioned, "Teaching him to be the man I needed growing up." That single line shattered me. Not because it was cruel, but because it was true. The messenger group was nothing fancy, just a digital thread called Alden Family Chat. I stumbled on it by accident while scrolling through a birthday post from Melissa. In one of the comments, David had mentioned tagging something in the group. Curious, I searched and found it. Profile picture, a cartoon turkey from last Thanksgiving description. Just for us Aldens. Just for us. The words felt oddly warm, like a fireplace in a cold house. I clicked request to join without much thought. It was late, nearly midnight. I was sitting in the kitchen alone with a cup of reheated coffee and the buzz of the refrigerator filling the silence. I told myself it was just a formality, a simple gesture. A grandfather wanting to be part of the laughter, the photos, the stories. I didn't expect confetti and welcome balloons, just a quiet acceptance, a small window back into the world that had slowly closed without my noticing. The next morning, I checked Messenger. No notification. That evening, still nothing. By day 3, I started to feel a twist in my chest every time I opened the app. Then came the message, request denied. No explanation, no follow-up, no "Hey Dad, maybe now's not the time." Just a cold mechanical rejection. A digital no, final and sterile. I stared at it blinking. Maybe it was a mistake, a slip of the thumb. Maybe the group was being archived or reorganized. But no, David was the admin. It would have required intention. He had looked at my name, my profile photo, probably still the same one from 5 years ago. Me in a baseball cap at a Mariners game, and clicked deny. As easily as swiping left on a spam request. I sat back in my chair, phone still glowing in my palm. The kitchen, already quiet, felt smaller somehow, like the room itself was shrinking around me. It wasn't just the rejection. It was what it implied, that I wasn't family. Not really. Not anymore. That even in this casual corner of digital life, I didn't belong. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe he thought I'd comment too much. Post awkward dad jokes or political articles. Maybe he was protecting his privacy. But the truth was simpler. He didn't want me there. Not even silently watching. I didn't message him. I didn't ask why. Something in me knew the answer wouldn't help. The truth would only cut deeper. Still, I couldn't help but replay the past, trying to find the moment when I'd gone from dad to nothing. When did I stop being welcome? Was it after the missed graduation? The last ignored voicemail? Was it gradual, like rust eating through steel? Or had I unknowingly crossed a line that could never be uncrossed? I thought about sending a message anyway. Something light, maybe even funny. Tried to sneak into the family circle and got caught. Guess I'll stay in the bleachers. But even typing the words made me feel pathetic. So I didn't send anything. I just sat there scrolling back through my own photos, looking for something, anything, that proved I'd once been central to this story. There was one of David on his 5th birthday, frosting smeared on his chin, laughing with a paper crown on his head. I was kneeling beside him mid-laugh. That moment had felt eternal. I had no idea how short it would be. I closed the app. Not out of anger, but out of grief. This wasn't just about Messenger. This was about being written out of a narrative I helped start. A group chat might seem trivial, but in that moment, it became a symbol for connection, for belonging, for family. And I had been refused entry. I went to bed early that night, the phone still lying face down on the kitchen table. As I lay there staring at the ceiling, a single thought circled over and over in my mind. I am no longer part of their us. I waited a week before trying again. Maybe the denial had been automatic. Maybe Melissa managed the group and didn't recognize my name. I told myself a dozen little lies to cushion the bruise. Eventually, I opened my contacts and tapped David's name. The phone rang 3 times before it went to voicemail. I didn't leave a message. The next day, I tried again. Same result. On the 3rd try, the call didn't even ring. Just a blunt, mechanical voice. The person you're trying to reach is unavailable. I switched to text. Hey, David. Just wondering if everything's okay. I tried calling. Seen. No reply. A few days passed. Then I tried again. I was hoping to get a picture of the little guy. He's grown so fast. Seen. Again. No reply. It was like sending signals into a void, hoping the stars would blink back. One morning, I decided to drop the pretense. David, if you don't want me to reach out anymore, I'll respect that. Just let me know. This time the reply came. Dad, I think it's better if we keep some space. You don't need to know what's going on with us anymore. That was it. A single sentence, meant to be polite, final distant. It hit harder than any argument we'd ever had. I read it again, then again. The words blurred slightly as tears welled in my eyes. I hadn't cried in years. Not at Joanna's funeral. Not when I sold the house we raised him in. But this cut through everything. What did he mean I didn't need to know? Had I become that irrelevant, that replaceable? For days I spiraled. Was it something Joanna said? She had always been the more expressive one. During the divorce, she called me cold distant, a paycheck and a suit. At the time, I thought she was being unfair. I was providing. I was doing my part. I had built our future. But futures don't mean much when you forget to live the present. I wondered if she had fed David stories over the years, stories that painted me as absent and different, maybe even cruel. Did she rewrite history? Or did David simply write me out on his own? There was also that one fight. God, it must have been 25 years ago when I told Joanna he'll be fine. Boys don't need coddling. She had just asked me to come to his school's family day. I had a meeting. I chose the meeting. Did David remember that? Did he hear it from her? Was that the moment he began building a wall, I tried to tell myself that people change, that wounds heal. But what if mine hadn't even started? Each unanswered message, each rejected call, confirmed what I was too ashamed to admit. My son didn't trust me anymore. Not with his time, not with his thoughts, not even with a photo of my own grandson. It's a strange kind of grief to mourn someone who's still alive, still posting online, still thriving. just not with you. I thought about driving to his house. I had the address. He didn't know I did, but I'd found it through a Christmas card Melissa once sent years ago, back when I was still allowed on the mailing list. But what would I say? What would I do? Show up unannounced on his lawn, like some ghost from a chapter he'd already closed? No, that wouldn't fix anything. That would only confirm whatever stories he already believed about me. So I stayed away. I stayed quiet. But the silence wasn't peace. It was punishment. I began to doubt every memory, every I love you from when he was small. Did he mean it? Or was it just mimicry, a child copying what he thought a son should say? I started rereading our old emails. There weren't many. The last one was a note I'd sent him when he got promoted. Proud of you, son. Let me know if you want to grab lunch sometime. No response. What did I do that was so unforgivable I paid? I never raised a hand. I kept my distance thinking it was what he wanted, thinking he needed space to grow, and now, all these years later, I had become the space. I sat on the back porch one night, whiskey in hand, listening to the wind move through the trees. It was the only voice that answered me now. Maybe I was wrong. Maybe love wasn't just support and shelter. Maybe love was presence, consistency, the showing up, even when uninvited. And maybe I had already run out of invitations. It was a Tuesday when I made the decision. I'd been sitting at my kitchen table, scrolling through another photo of my grandson in a paper crown this time for his 6th birthday. The caption read, "First grade king for a day." The school logo on his shirt gave away the location. I stared at that picture until my coffee went cold. The next morning, I drove to the elementary school. I didn't know exactly what I was hoping to find. Maybe just proof that he was real. That I hadn't imagined him into existence with photos and assumptions. I parked across the street behind a row of half-dead bushes, watching as parents came and went. SUVs lined the curb. Kids climbed into booster seats, backpacks flung over shoulders, lunchboxes dangling like forgotten promises. And then I saw him. David. He was taller than I remembered, more filled out. Wearing a dark coat, sunglasses pushed into his hair, he held his son's hand, my grandson, and knelt to zip up the boy's jacket with a gentleness that made my throat close. I stepped out of the car before I could talk myself out of it. "David," I said. He turned slowly, as if he already knew I was there. "Dad," he said flatly. Just that. No surprise, no emotion, like he'd expected this moment eventually and already decided it would mean nothing. I took a breath. "I'm not here to cause a scene. You're already doing that. I just wanted to see him," I said, nodding toward the boy who now stood behind his father, gripping the hem of David's coat. "You've seen enough," he replied. Silence stretched between us like a wire drawn tight. I wanted to speak, but the words fumbled behind my teeth. "You followed us?" he asked. "That's what this is." "No, I just saw the school in a post." He shook his head, biting the inside of his cheek. "This isn't how you come back into someone's life." I didn't know how else I said softer now. "You won't answer my calls. You deny my requests. What am I supposed to do?" He didn't answer. The boy peeked around him, curious but shy. I wanted to say something to him, to introduce myself to Neil and offer a smile, but I didn't dare. "I'm sorry," I said finally. "I just miss you." David stared at me for a long time, his jaw tight. Then he said, "Do you remember my 16th birthday?" The question stunned me. I tried. I truly did. 16. Was that the year I was in Chicago? No. Maybe Denver. I remember a storm. A delayed flight. Or maybe I just forgot altogether. I opened my mouth, but nothing came out. His expression didn't change, but I saw something flicker. Disappointment. Confirmation. You were in Tampa, he said. At a hotel conference. You sent a text 2 days later. Said you thought it was the following weekend. I'm sorry, I said, but it sounded hollow. He looked away, blinking hard. You know what sucks, Dad? I didn't even expect you to show up. But when I checked my phone that night, part of me still hoped. My throat tightened. I didn't mean I know you didn't. That's the problem. You never meant to hurt me. You just weren't there. And now you want to be just like that. No, I said. Not just like that. I know I can't undo anything. I just want a chance to what he cut in. See my kid. Be a grandfather. You missed being a dad, and now you want to skip ahead to the fun part. That line hit harder than anything he'd said before. I looked down. I didn't come to demand anything. I just wanted to see him. One time. That's all. He nodded slowly, breathing out through his nose. The bell rang behind us, and kids spilled out the front doors, their voices high and chaotic. David looked at his son. Go to the car, he said gently. The boy obeyed, casting one last glance back at me. David turned to me again. Don't do this again, please. And then he walked away. I stood there for a long time after the car pulled out of the lot. The sky was gray, the wind sharp. My hands ached. It had been 10 years since we stood face to face. 10 years of silence avoidance assumption. I had built so many excuses in that time, convinced myself that the door might still be unlocked if I knocked just right. But today, he had shut it in front of me, with words I couldn't argue against, with memories I couldn't repair. I didn't try again for a while. After that day outside the school, something inside me went quiet. Not the silence of surrender, but the kind that follows a deep wound when the body hasn't processed the pain yet, so it just shuts down. I stopped opening Facebook for a few weeks. I told myself I needed space, but in truth I was afraid. Afraid of what I might see, and more afraid of what I wouldn't. Eventually, I logged back in. Joanna's profile was gone. At first, I thought she had deactivated her account. But when I searched from a different browser without logging in, I could see it just fine. She had blocked me. There was no warning, no final message, no this is for the best, just digital erasure. One day, I was a shadow on the fringes of her online world, and the next I was gone completely. Melissa had never blocked me. She just ignored everything. Birthday wishes, holiday greetings, an old photo I sent of David as a toddler eating spaghetti with his hands. No likes, no replies, not even a thumbs up. When their son was born, I didn't find out from a call or even a text. I saw it through a mutual connections repost. A picture of a newborn wrapped in a blue blanket captioned, "Welcome to the world, Jason Alden." That was how I learned my grandson's name. Jason. I whispered it aloud alone in the living room, letting the syllables settle on my tongue like a foreign word. Jason. My name was nowhere in that post. No tag. No mention. Just a father, a mother, and their perfect little boy. A family I hadn't been invited into. I left a comment. Just one line. Beautiful. Congratulations. It disappeared within the hour. I don't know if Melissa deleted it, or David, or maybe they reported it, labeled it as intrusive or inappropriate. It didn't matter. What mattered was that I wasn't welcome. That became clear over the next few months. I sent a card for Jason's first birthday. No response. A small toy truck for Christmas. Nothing. Not even a delivery confirmation. It could have gone straight into the trash for all I knew. It's a strange thing to be biologically tethered to someone and yet completely severed in practice. To know that your blood runs through their veins, but your presence doesn't reach their world. Like watching your house burn down from across the street, unable to cross. I began to think of myself, not as a grandfather, but as a ghost. A living one. And the coldness didn't stop at David and Melissa. Even mutual friends and extended relatives stopped tagging me in family photos. When I commented on a group post, no one replied. It was as if my name had been quietly blacklisted, erased from the narrative. I attended my cousin's funeral last fall. David was there, standing by the coffee urn in the church basement, talking to Melissa and some relatives. I stood 15 feet away for nearly half an hour. He never looked in my direction. Melissa glanced at me once, then turned away. I didn't approach. I couldn't. That's when I realized I had been systematically, collectively frozen out. No one had said it aloud, but a consensus had been reached I didn't belong. It's a particular kind of grief to be erased by people still very much alive. I had imagined dying alone once or twice, but I never imagined being alive and treated like I already had. Jason was 5 now. I had never held him, never heard him laugh. I didn't know if he liked dinosaurs or trucks, if he hated vegetables, if he had nightmares, or liked to build pillow forts. I didn't know what his voice sounded like when he called someone grandpa. Because he didn't call anyone that. At least not me. And maybe he never would. One night, I sat at my dining table and spread out everything I had left, every photo, every card, every gift I'd sent and never gotten a reply for. I lined them up like artifacts of a life I hadn't lived. Then I pulled out a sheet of paper and wrote his name at the top, Jason. Underneath I wrote, "You don't know me, but I'm your grandfather. And I've been waiting for the day we might meet." Then I stopped. I couldn't finish it. Not yet. Maybe not ever. It's a hard truth to swallow, being made into an outsider in a family you helped create. But that's where I was outside. Watching, wondering, wishing. A stranger to my own blood. Jason was turning 7. I had marked the date on my calendar months earlier, though no one had told me when his birthday party would be. I knew I wouldn't be invited. That was already clear. But still, I felt like I had to do something. To show up in some way, even if it was only digitally, silently, and from afar. That morning, I sat at the kitchen table with my phone in my hand, trying to find the right words. I typed, deleted, retyped. Finally, I settled on something simple. Safe. Happy birthday, Jason. I hope you have a fun day. I'd love to meet you sometime. From Grandpa. It felt small, insignificant, but it was what I had. I sent it at 9:03 a.m. I didn't expect an answer. Not from him, of course. He was a child, likely too busy with cake and presents to look at a phone. And I knew David screened everything. But still, I hoped maybe, just maybe this time, he'd let it slide through. That maybe something in my tone would reach him. It was 11:17 a.m. when the reply came. I saw the notification on my screen as I poured my second cup of coffee. The preview showed the beginning of a message. Please don't. I opened it. Please don't send messages to Jason anymore. He doesn't know who you are, and I'd prefer to keep it that way. I stared at the words, reading them again and again, as if repetition would make them change. He doesn't know who you are. That was the part that landed like a fist to the chest. Not, he's not ready to meet you. Not, let's talk first. Just a wall. Jason didn't know I existed because David had never told him. 7 years of life, and not once had my name been spoken in that boy's home. It wasn't just rejection. It was erasure. I sat down slowly, the phone still in my hand, as if it had suddenly become heavier. I had imagined many things over the past few years. I had imagined being seen as distant, maybe even cold. I had imagined being called a bad father, even a selfish one. But I had never imagined being rendered invisible. I had never imagined that my grandson would grow up thinking his grandfather was a blank space, a question unanswered, or worse, a subject never even raised. What had David told him? Had he said I was dead, or had he simply said nothing? No bedtime stories about the man who built bridges for a living. No old photos. No mention of the hands that once held him as a baby before the divorce changed everything. No memories passed down. Nothing. I typed a response, hands trembling slightly. I'm sorry. I just wanted him to know I exist, that I care. I hovered over the send button, then I deleted it. What was the point? David had made it clear. I wasn't just unwelcome. I was unknown. Unacknowledged. And the most painful part, Jason's words weren't even his own. They were his father's, filtered through a 7-year-old's name. But they landed all the same. He doesn't know who you are. I sat there for a long time, staring out the window, watching the wind twist the dead leaves on the porch. Somewhere in another part of town, my grandson was likely blowing out candles, surrounded by laughter, and people he called family. People who had been allowed into his story. And I was just a stranger with the wrong last name. That night I didn't sleep. I kept thinking of that little boy, the way he had peeked around David's leg outside the school a year earlier. He hadn't smiled. He hadn't run. He had simply looked at me the way you look at someone waiting in line ahead of you briefly, and then gone. I used to think the worst part of being estranged was the silence. But I was wrong. The worst part is the forgetting. Being forgotten so completely that even your name is unknown. That your place in the world ends not with a bang or a fight, but with a child asking, "Who's that?" and no one having an answer. The frame shattered before I realized I had thrown it. It was a photo from David's 5th birthday. Joanna had taken it him with cake on his face, his tiny arms wrapped around my neck. I was smiling. He was laughing. For years it had been one of the few memories I kept displayed on the shelf above the fireplace. Now it lay face down on the hardwood floor, glass in splinters, one of the corners chipped. I stared at it, chest heaving. My hands were still clenched. The sudden violence of my own movement surprising me. I hadn't raised my voice. I hadn't screamed. The anger had moved through me like a current short-circuiting something deep inside. I sat down slowly on the edge of the couch, staring at my open palms. They were shaking. That night, I didn't sleep. The light from the hallway filtered through the crack under my bedroom door like a silent witness. I lay on my back, eyes fixed on the ceiling, every minute stretching like a mile. He doesn't know who you are. The phrase looped in my mind like a cruel refrain, seeping into every thought, every memory. I could hear David's voice even when I closed my eyes. Cold, distant, final. I didn't eat the next morning, didn't shave, just moved from the bed to the armchair still in my pajamas, clutching a mug of tea that went cold before I remembered to sip it. By the 3rd day, I stopped checking my phone. What was the point? No one was calling. No one would. The house felt smaller, quieter than usual. Each room, a reminder of conversations never had, of photos never taken. Dust gathered on the windowsill. I couldn't bring myself to wipe it away. It wasn't just sadness. It was something heavier. Numbness. A kind of invisible fog that hung in the air. I stopped turning on the TV. I couldn't bear to hear commercials about family vacations or see sitcoms with grandfathers who made corny jokes and hugged too tight. I thought I was slipping. Thought maybe I'd go under and not come back. But somewhere around the fourth day, something shifted. I pulled out a pen. Not my laptop. Not my phone. Just a pen and a legal pad. I sat at the kitchen table, same one where I'd first read Jason's name, and began to write. Dear David, I started. Then I crossed it out. Son, I wrote instead. It felt more honest, more human. I'm writing this because I don't know how else to reach you anymore. Every door I've knocked on has stayed shut, and I understand now that it's not just about space. It's about pain. Yours and mine. The words began to come slow at first, then flowing like a river that had been dammed too long. I wasn't there, I wrote. I told myself that providing was enough. That if the lights were on and the bills were paid, then I was doing my job. I believed that love could be wired into paychecks, into packages, into tuition checks. But I missed the bedtime stories, the late night talks, the scraped knees. And worst of all, I missed knowing you. I didn't hold back. I confessed the days I had chosen work over fatherhood. The moments I remembered too late. The calls I let go to voicemail because I didn't know what to say. I made mistakes I continued. Not dramatic ones, just quiet ones. Absences that added up. And now I see the result. I've lost the right to expect anything. But if I can give you something now, anything, it's the truth. I told him I understood why he shut me out, why he kept Jason away. But I hope you tell him one day, I wrote. Not for me. For him. I hope he knows there was a man who thought of him every day. Who never met him, but still loved him. Who whispered his name into the silence, hoping it might echo back someday. By the time I reached the end, my hand was cramping, the pen's ink beginning to fade. I don't expect forgiveness, I wrote. I just want you to know I was wrong. And I'm sorry. For all of it. I folded the letter carefully, placed it in an envelope, and addressed it by hand. Then I set it on the counter. I didn't mail it that day. I wasn't sure I ever would. But for the first time in a long time, I slept that night. Not deeply, not without dreams. But I slept. The letter sat untouched on the counter for 2 more days. Every morning I passed it. Every evening I glanced at it, then kept walking. It was as if it had weight, like it pulled on the atmosphere around it. It wasn't just paper and ink. It was everything I had never said. Everything I had been too proud or too blind to admit. Finally, on the 3rd night, I picked it up again. I unfolded it slowly, the creases now soft from handling. I reread every word, not to edit or revise, but to relive the truth I had poured into it. And then at the bottom, I added one last sentence. I don't expect you to forgive me. I only hope you understand, some days, loneliness feels more terrifying than death. I stared at that line for a long time before I set the pen down, because it was true. Loneliness, real loneliness, isn't just about being alone. It's about being unseen, unwanted, forgotten. It's about sending messages into silence and wondering if your voice still has a place in the world. There had been moments over the past few years when I'd convinced myself I didn't need connection, that I had learned to live without it. But the lie always cracked under pressure. The silence of that house screamed louder with every passing week. The absence of a child's laugh, the missing echoes of shared meals, the emptiness after a birthday that no one called to remind me of. The truth was I was terrified, not of dying, but of being erased, of leaving nothing behind that mattered, of disappearing from the stories my grandson would one day hear. I signed the letter and sealed the envelope. I didn't write Dad on the return address, just my name, Robert Alden. Then I walked 2 blocks to the nearest mailbox, the envelope in my coat pocket, heavy like a stone. I stood there for several minutes, my hand hovering over the slot. Part of me wanted to tear it up, to walk away, to avoid the finality of it. But something deeper, older, told me that this was not a letter of demand. It was not a plea for access. It was a surrender. So I let it go. The envelope slid through the slot, and it was done. I walked home in the cold hands in my pockets, breath clouding in front of me like smoke. The next day, I did something I hadn't done in years. I pulled out an old box of photos from the hallway closet. There were pictures of David at every age missing teeth, Halloween costumes, school recitals. I had stored them away, afraid they would hurt too much. But now I felt something shift. Not peace, not yet, but something softer. Acceptance, maybe. I found a photo of David as a newborn, swaddled in Joanna's arms. I was in the frame, too awkwardly holding a bouquet of yellow daisies, smiling like a man who had no idea how much he'd already lost. I pinned the photo to the fridge, right where I'd see it every morning. That night, I made dinner for one. A simple stew the way Joanna used to make it. I ate slowly, listening to the quiet. I didn't expect a reply, didn't refresh my inbox every 5 minutes. I had said what I needed to say. That letter wasn't for reconciliation. It was a final act of honesty. I had lived so much of my life assuming that doing enough would carry me through. That responsibility could substitute for love. That money could speak in the silence. But it couldn't. And now I'd written it down, every failure, every regret, every desperate truth. So that whether or not David ever read it, I had said it. Even if I remained a stranger to my grandson, even if I never got a reply, at least now I had spoken. And that somehow was enough. A week after mailing the letter, I found myself in the attic, rummaging through boxes I hadn't opened in years. Dust clung to my sleeves, and the air was thick with the smell of insulation and old cardboard. I wasn't sure what I was looking for. Maybe a reason to keep holding on, or maybe a way to let go. And then I found it. It was tucked beneath a pile of tax returns and yellowing blueprints, an old manila folder soft at the edges, bound with a rubber band stretched nearly to its breaking point. Inside was a drawing. David had made it when he was 4. Crayon on construction paper, bright and chaotic, a stick figure family standing under a sun with a face. The figures were labeled in blocky letters, Mom, Me, and Dad. My arms were too long, reaching nearly to the corners of the page. He'd drawn me, smiling with stars around my head. I sat down on a plastic storage bin and stared at it for a long time. In the bottom of the box were other items: a clay handprint from kindergarten, a plastic medal from a little league game I'd missed, and a letter folded and refolded so many times the crease had nearly split. It was from Joanna, dated just a week after she filed for divorce. Robert, it began, I hope one day you'll understand that this isn't about hate. It's about what our son needs and what you've forgotten to give. I hadn't read it in over 30 years, but now the words settled over me with a weight I could finally feel. I packed the drawing, the letter, and the medal into a small wooden box I had once used for keepsakes. Then I added one more thing, a copy of my will. I'd had it updated recently, not because of illness or any looming threat, but because I realized I needed to put something in writing, a gesture, a final offering. In it, I had named Jason Alden my grandson, whom I had never met, as the sole beneficiary of my home. It wasn't much, a 2-bedroom craftsman with aging shingles and a creaky porch swing. But it was paid for. It had warmth, and it was all I had left of value. I wrapped the box, carefully lined it with old newspaper, and taped the corners. On top, I placed a short note to David and Melissa. I'm not asking to come back. I just wanted to give back what I still have. I shipped it without tracking. No return receipt. No signature required. I didn't need to know when it arrived. I just needed to send it. When I returned home, the house felt quieter than usual. Not empty, just still. As if it too was waiting. Over the next few days, I didn't hear anything. No message, no reply. I didn't expect one. But something inside me began to shift. I had always believed that love had to be earned through labor sacrifice, years of showing up. And maybe that was true. But I'd also learned that sometimes the most powerful kind of love was the one that asked for nothing in return. That simply gave what it could while it still could. I thought about Jason and what kind of man he might become. I wondered if he liked to draw, if he had his father's love of science or his mother's gift for detail. I wondered if someday he would stand in front of that old house and see his name etched into the deed and ask the question David had never wanted him to ask: who gave me this? And maybe, if that moment came, David would tell him. Maybe he would pull out the drawing, or the letter, or the medal. Maybe he would finally speak my name. That night, I sat on the porch with a cup of tea, watching the sun disappear behind the rooftops. I thought about how we carry things regret, hope, memory, not in our arms, but in our chests, and how sometimes setting them down doesn't mean forgetting. It just means we're ready to breathe again. The wooden box was out of my hands now. So was the outcome. But for the first time in years, I felt like I had said something real. And maybe that was enough. The package arrived on a Thursday afternoon, left on the front porch, between a box of diapers and a bag of groceries. Melissa found it first. It wasn't addressed to her, but she recognized the handwriting immediately. She brought it inside and set it on the kitchen counter, next to the half-prepared lunch and Jason's forgotten spelling homework. The wooden box inside felt heavier than its size suggested, dense with memory, with tension, with something she couldn't quite name. When David came home from work that evening, she handed it to him without a word. He didn't open it right away. He stood over it for a long time, arms crossed, jaw set, as if opening it might trigger something he wasn't prepared to feel. Melissa stood nearby, quiet, giving him space. Finally, David sat down at the kitchen table and peeled back the tape. The lid creaked as he lifted it. The first thing he saw was the drawing. He paused, blinking, as if unsure what he was looking at. Then recognition struck. He reached for it with both hands, as if the paper might dissolve if he moved too quickly. The drawing had faded, the colors dulled by time. But he knew it instantly. "I made this when I was a kid," he said aloud, mostly to himself. Melissa stepped closer. He turned the paper over. On the back, in blocky, uncertain letters, was his name and the date, David, age 4. Beneath it lay a small bundle, his Little League medal, the kind every kid got just for showing up. David held it like a relic. Then his fingers found the letter. It was in his mother's handwriting. She had written it after the divorce, a note he had never seen. He read it slowly, lips pressed into a thin line, his eyes scanning every line like he was decoding a message from the dead. Melissa watched him carefully. She'd seen him angry before, defensive, cold, but never this. When he finished reading, he set the letter down with both hands and closed his eyes. Then he reached into the box again and found the last envelope, the one labeled Temporary Will. He hesitated. Melissa opened it for him. Her hands trembled as she read. She was silent for a long moment, eyes scanning the document. Then her hand covered her mouth. "He's leaving the house to Jason?" she said quietly. David looked up. "Would he put it in writing?" "It's signed. Witnessed. It's real." David leaned back in his chair, staring at the ceiling like it might give him answers. Melissa blinked rapidly. He never even met Jason. He's leaving him everything. The room filled with silence. Then Melissa whispered, "This isn't a demand. It's a goodbye." David didn't reply. He looked back at the drawing again, tracing the crayon lines with his finger. "I remember making this," he said. He wasn't home that night. Mom and I did it together. I told her I wanted to show it to him. She said we'd give it to him next weekend. He looked away, blinking hard. But I forgot, or maybe I didn't. Maybe I just stopped wanting to. Melissa sat down beside him. "You know," she said softly, "you don't have to forgive him. But maybe Jason deserves to know who he was." David didn't answer, but his silence was different now. It wasn't the silence of refusal, it was the silence of reconsidering. He took the letter from his mother and read it again. Melissa rested her hand on his arm. "I think he just wanted to be remembered," she said. David's eyes fell back on the will. He stared at Jason's name printed in black and white on legal paper he never expected to see. A minute passed, then another. Finally, he whispered, "He doesn't want back in. He just wanted to leave something behind." Melissa nodded, her voice thick. "Maybe it's time we let Jason know who he was." David didn't say yes. He didn't say no. But that night, after Jason had brushed his teeth and climbed into bed, David walked into the bedroom holding the drawing. He sat beside his son and unfolded the paper. "Hey, buddy," he said gently. "Want to see something I made when I was your age?" Jason looked up curious. "You drew this?" David smiled faintly. "Yeah. And you see that guy with the long arms? That's your grandpa." Jason blinked. Grandpa David nodded. "You haven't met him yet, but he wanted you to have this." Jason studied the paper for a long moment, then smiled. "He gave it to me." David hesitated. "Yeah," he said softly. He did. It was a Thursday afternoon when the message arrived. I hadn't expected anything, not after the letter, not after the box. I had told myself day after day that silence was the answer. That what I had done was enough, and I would never know if it reached them. I had made peace with that, or at least I thought I had. I was rinsing out a coffee cup when I heard my phone buzz from across the room. I let it sit for a moment, assuming it was a spam call or another bank notification. But something nudged me, a flicker of instinct, the kind that lives in your bones when you've waited long enough for something to matter. I walked over and checked the screen. Messenger. The name read, Jason Alden. I stared at it for a second, unsure if I was hallucinating. Then I opened the message. Hi, this is Jason. My dad showed me the drawing. He said it's from you. My hand trembled slightly as I read it. Another message appeared a moment later. You're my grandpa. I sat down slowly, unable to speak. even to myself. The next message came seconds after. If you're not busy tomorrow, maybe you can come over for dinner. Mom said it's okay. I didn't move. I just kept rereading it over and over as if the words might change or vanish. He didn't call me sir. He didn't ask if I remembered him. He called me Grandpa. And the invitation, it wasn't from David. It wasn't a guarded, reluctant concession from an adult trying to be fair. It was a 7-year-old boy reaching out, uninfluenced, untouched by the weight of decades. I sat there in stunned silence, tears welling up, blurring the words on the screen. I typed a reply, then erased it. Typed again, deleted again. Finally, I wrote, "Yes, I'd love that very much. Thank you, Jason." He sent back a thumbs up emoji. It was the most beautiful thing I'd ever seen. The next morning, I woke before the sun. I shaved, carefully picked out a shirt I hadn't worn in years, and went through 3 different jackets before settling on one that didn't feel too formal or too eager. I brought a small tin of cookies, store-bought, but neatly arranged on a plate with a cloth napkin underneath. I had no idea what kind of food he liked. I just wanted to bring something. The drive was quiet. I took the long route not because of traffic, but because I needed the extra time. Time to rehearse nothing in particular. Time to settle the storm inside me. When I pulled into the driveway, the porch light was already on. It was still early evening, but it felt like the house was waiting for me. The door opened before I knocked. Jason stood there barefoot, wearing a superhero t-shirt, his hair slightly messy. "Hi," he said, grinning. "Hi," I said, barely trusting my voice. "You brought cookies?" he asked, pointing to the plate. I did. "Cool." He stepped aside to let me in. Melissa appeared from the kitchen, smiling gently. "Hi, Mr. Alden." "Please," I said, clearing my throat. "Just Robert. Or Grandpa, if that's okay." She smiled again. "It's okay." David appeared last. He didn't say anything right away. Just gave me a nod, small, but not cold. I nodded back. We sat at the table, and Jason launched into a story about his school project, his favorite dinosaur, and how he once beat his dad at Mario Kart, even though, in his words, Dad totally cheated. I laughed. I didn't mean to, but I laughed, and it felt real. For most of the meal, I just listened. I didn't want to interrupt the rhythm. I wanted to memorize every detail: his voice, the way he waved his fork in the air, how Melissa gently corrected his grammar, how David smiled in the corner of his mouth when Jason said something clever. At one point, Jason looked at me and said, "I have questions." "Oh," I asked. "Yeah, what kind of cookies do you like? Do you know how to fish? Did my dad ever get in trouble when he was little?" David chuckled softly and shook his head. "Don't give him too many stories." Jason looked back at me, eyes bright. "You can tell me anyway." And I did. I told him about David breaking a neighbor's window with a baseball, about how he once tried to cut his own hair and ended up with a bald spot, about how he used to hate green beans so much he'd stuff them in his socks to avoid eating them. Jason laughed so hard he nearly fell out of his chair. And in that laughter, something in me healed. I had missed everything. Birthdays, first words scraped knees. But in that moment, I had something I never thought I'd get a beginning. The dinner wasn't extravagant. Spaghetti garlic bread, a bowl of salad that Jason avoided entirely. But to me, it might as well have been a feast. Every movement felt precious: the clink of forks, the scrape of a chair, the way the light bounced off the kitchen walls. No one talked much at first. Melissa offered me water. David passed the bread. Jason filled the silence the way only a child can, with unfiltered curiosity and unapologetic joy. He sat beside me close enough that our elbows nearly touched. He talked about his math test, about a science project involving paper rockets, and about how one kid in his class insisted dinosaurs had feathers, which Jason firmly believed was weird, but cool. I listened, nodded, laughed in all the right places, but mostly I watched him, his expressions, his gestures, his eyes so familiar, they made my chest ache. Across the table, David kept his gaze low. He ate slowly, deliberately. His posture was tight, his shoulders pulled in slightly, as if he was still waiting for the other shoe to drop. But he didn't speak against me, didn't glare. And that in itself was a miracle. No one mentioned the messenger group. No one brought up the years of silence. The absence hung in the air, yes, but it was no longer a weapon, just a presence, something we all acknowledged by choosing not to name it. For a while, we just existed together, eating, breathing, sharing space. And somehow, that was enough. Melissa refilled my glass. Jason asked if I'd ever been on an airplane. I told him about a trip to Alaska where I'd once seen a moose the size of a van. His eyes went wide. David smiled barely, but I saw it. After dinner, Jason disappeared to fetch a drawing he'd made. "It's me and you," he said proudly, holding up a crayon sketch. "I didn't know what color your eyes were, so I made them green." "They're brown," I said, smiling. "But green's perfect." He beamed. It struck me then, this boy had nothing to prove, no grudges to carry. He had been given a name and now a seat at the table to place it. And so had I. Later, when I stood to leave, Jason walked me to the door. He held the drawing in his hand. "Can you come again next week?" he asked. My throat tightened. "If your parents say it's okay," I replied. He nodded. "I'll ask." David stepped into the hallway then. We stood there for a moment, the three of us, awkward and quiet. Then David spoke. He liked the cookies, he said, nodding toward the empty plate. I'm glad I said. He looked at me. Really, looked at me for the first time in years. I'm not ready to talk about everything he said. But maybe it doesn't have to stay the way it was. I nodded slowly, the words catching behind my tongue. No, I said, it doesn't. When I stepped out into the evening air, the sky was pale with dusk and the street was quiet. I stood there for a while, watching the warm light in their front window, listening to faint laughter drifting through the glass. And for the first time, in a long time, I didn't feel like a ghost. I felt present. Maybe not forgiven. Maybe not fully healed. But there. In the weeks that followed, I visited once a week, sometimes twice if Jason insisted. Each visit was a quiet victory. We didn't talk about the past. We didn't talk about wounds letters or the years lost. But something had shifted. There was space now, not to explain, but to exist. Jason started calling me Grandpa without hesitation. No one told him to. It wasn't forced or rehearsed. It just happened one afternoon when he held up a toy plane and said, Grandpa, can you help me fix this wing? I almost dropped the screwdriver. David heard it. He looked up briefly from the kitchen, then returned to his coffee. He didn't say anything, but he didn't flinch either. That was enough. And with each passing visit, I began to understand something I had never grasped before. Not in my youth, not during my years as a provider, not even during the long silence that followed. Forgiveness. Real forgiveness isn't something you can demand. It's something you wait for. Quietly. Gently. Patiently. And sometimes It never arrives in words. Sometimes it arrives in a shared meal, a quiet nod, or a child resting their head on your shoulder during a movie. The weight I'd carried for so long of shame, of regret, of self-imposed exile didn't vanish. But it shifted. It became something manageable, something I could set down now and then, without fear that it would crush me. One Sunday afternoon, while Jason played in the yard, I sat on the porch with David. He handed me a glass of iced tea, then leaned back in his chair, his gaze on his son. "You were right. You know," he said quietly. "About what loneliness," he said. "It's worse than I thought." I didn't reply. I didn't need to. He sipped the tea, then added, "I'm not saying everything's fine, but I'm not angry anymore. Just tired." I nodded. I know the feeling. We sat there for a while watching Jason dig a hole for a plastic dinosaur, the sun warming our faces, the breeze brushing past like a forgotten hymn. Later that evening, when I returned home, I pulled out a fresh sheet of paper and wrote something I hadn't written in decades. Today was a good day. I folded it carefully and placed it in the same wooden box that had once carried memories of a son. Now, it would hold pieces of a new beginning. That night, as I lay in bed, I found myself repeating the same line over and over in my mind, not out of habit, but out of truth. Family is not a right. It's a privilege. And sometimes that privilege has to be earned not through grand gestures or perfect words, but through consistency, humility, and quiet persistence. We are not owed a place in someone's life just because we share their blood. We are given it if we are lucky, if we are willing, and if we are patient enough to wait for the door to open. And when it does, you step in slowly. You take off your shoes. You listen more than you speak. And you never ever forget that being allowed in is a gift.